Welcome to the second day of the conference, Beijing+30. And we have a new program today, very exciting program, where we are going to have several themes: violence, conflicts, and also many things around feminist economics. So welcome all of you. And now I give the word to one of our GABIP members, Regina, who's going to introduce the first session today.
Thank you. This work okay? I think we had some trouble with it yesterday.
Yeah.
Kanske? Ja, okej, vad bra. Thank you, Eric. And welcome to the second day of the Beijing+30 conference. Welcome also to you online. I have the exciting privilege, so to speak, to introduce the first session of the day. Just wanted to mention that yesterday we really laid a strong foundation on the discussions about the Beijing platform. We saw a fantastic movie that really gave us the feeling of what it was like to be there 30 years ago. We learned about feminist foreign policy in Sweden, climate governance, and the broader Beijing for action, really setting the scene and the scope for these past 2 days. This morning, we turned our focus to something very urgent, although we heard in the movie yesterday that already in 1975, gender-based violence was at the top of the agenda at the meeting. But unfortunately, it's still very urgent today. We're honored to be joined by some incredible speakers today who will each bring a critical perspective to the discussion, from Sweden's migration law and intimate partner violence to the interlinkages between sexual violence, climate change, and citizenship rights to women, and the organizations that work in the resistance movements of ongoing conflict and war. So as we begin, I made a short slide just so that you can focus your eyes on something other than myself as I go through just the urgency of the question, because this really is important to set the scope and to highlight the fact that gender-based violence is not only a global issue. We see it in every act of life, in every countries, in every context, in every social classes, in every religion. It's a global issue, and it's a severe violation of human rights. But it's not only that, but we see now as well that it's used as a political tool, as a tool of control, and in too many cases, a weapon of war. And these numbers come from UN Women. We heard that yesterday from UN Women. But globally, 1 in 3 women, or 736 million women worldwide, have been subjected to sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. And this is not accounting for economic or psychological or sexual harassment and all these other forms of violence that we see perpetrated in everyday life. And more than 5 women and girls are killed every hour. This is equivalent to 1 woman every 10 minutes is killed globally. So it's really an urgent question. Less than 40% of women who experience violence seek any type of support. And as we will hear today, I believe that this is probably going to decrease as we see funding decreasing also for women's shelters and women's organizations around the world. I wanted to mention also that most of the violence perpetrated, and we all know this here, but it's important to say that it's often by somebody that the person knows. So it's not always, somebody random in the streets, but it's perpetrated in the home. And gender-based violence really is at the heart of the backlash against women's rights. And it's been an actor throughout the past 30 years of the Sit-Up Declaration from Beijing. And it acts in different forms and operates on many levels. In the home, like I said, for many women, this is the most dangerous place for them. In the community, where sexual violence is used to instill fear and uphold patriarchal structures. And in society, where gender-based violence is deployed as a weapon of war, as a means to destabilize and destroy communities physically, emotionally, and generationally. We see here in Sweden, where all of the women who were killed last year had previously reported the person that they were killed by, a former or a current intimate partner. And we see that violence among youth here in Sweden is growing. So now it's every 1 in 4 young girls have been experienced or have experienced violence. And this is very similar to the global scale, where on the global level, one of the main risk factors, as we see today, is being adolescents. So one of the main risk factors for intimate partner violence is your age, which is a very scary development. But it's not only that, but a lot of different social actors are at interplay and create vulnerabilities, making particular groups of women more vulnerable to violence. And gender-based violence not only was heightened during the COVID pandemic and the aftermath thereof, but its prevalence is now being further increased by the intersecting crisis of climate change, global conflict, and economic instability, which we will hear about today. So it's against this setting and the current, backlash against women's rights, which is both well funded and well organized. We see the attacks on women's rights defenders. We see the cuts in funding. There are regressive laws, and legal status of women's rights are being pulled back in many countries that have come quite far. And I mentioned that risk factors are also women who face many different stigma or discrimination, and women on the move, in particular migrant women, I should say, are at particular risk. And we see that the interlocking crises, including economic crisis, conflicts, and climate change, really are intensifying gender-based violence. And these numbers are from UN Women. Actually, I was looking at them yesterday. I wanted to make sure that they were up to date. We see that through research, intimate partner violence intersects dangerously with migration laws. Women on dependent visas face often a cruel choice, and we'll learn about this more today with two people who are working with this issue here in Sweden. And this choice is usually staying in an abusive relationship or risking deportation. And these legal frameworks, sometimes unknowingly and sometimes very deliberately, create structures of entrapment for women. And this is really a testament to, or what we mean when we talk about structural violence, the subtle yet deeply embedded laws, policies, and practices that constrain women's agency, limit their options, and leave them exposed to harm. As I said, conflict, climate change, and economic crisis all fuel in gender-based violence. And I read that in humanitarian settings, up to 70% of women experience gender-based violence. So this is double the global average. And these cases aren't isolated. They are systematic and widespread. Yet the organizations working on the front lines, like we heard yesterday from Ulrika from UN Women, are being severely pushed to the brink. Almost half of women's organizations risk shutting down on a global scale within the next couple of months. And 72% have already laid off staff, and over half have already suspended critical services for gender-based violence survivors, healthcare and protection. So the number we saw in the beginning, 40% of women have actually sought help. We can only imagine how, that number will decrease as also the services decrease. So let's be clear, this is not just statistics. These are lifelines being severed. And it's against this backdrop really that we're here today to look towards the future, to learn, to see the reality of the issue, and to hopefully gain some insight on how we can move forward, how we can act up, and how we can fund up. Because we do see and we know that gender-based violence is preventable, right? And it's one of the single most important measures to prevent this issue is a strong and autonomous women's rights movement. So, very thankful to our speakers who are here today, who will help us connect the dots between migration and policy, between war and survival, between systems and resistance, and let us recommit to the Beijing platform and take what we learned today and put it into action. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first two speakers. Now I see only one name is on the agenda, but please welcome up Sara and Huda from Lex5 to talk more about intimate partner violence within the framework of the Swedish migration law. Welcome. I think we only have one of these.
Yeah, you can start that. I'll take it.
Varsågoda. Ja, så har vi en bra.